The engine roared as I floored the gas, my old pickup truck rattling down the empty stretch of Route 17, dust swirling in the twilight. My hands gripped the wheel, knuckles white, trying to outrun the weight of my father's words. You're no son of mine if you choose that life. I didn't know where I was going, only that I needed to escape the suffocating silence of our small-town Virginia home, where every whispered judgment felt like a blade. I wasn't looking for him. I wasn't looking for anyone. But there he was, a lone figure on the side of the road, his silhouette framed against the fading sun. A backpack slung over one shoulder, his flannel shirt untucked. He walked with a quiet defiance, like he was carrying a story too heavy for words. I slowed the truck, my heart pounding for reasons I couldn't name. Something about him, maybe the way his eyes caught mine when he turned, or the faint curve of a smile that didn't quite reach his lips, made me pull over. I didn't know it then, but that moment would unravel everything I thought I knew about myself. My name is Ethan Caldwell, 24, a mechanic's son from Willow Creek, where the world is as narrow as the dirt roads that carve through it. I'd spent my life trying to fit into the mold my father built, tough, stoic, straight. But the truth was a splinter under my skin, one I'd ignored until it bled. That night, as the stars began to prick the sky, I wasn't just driving to clear my head. I was running from the lie I'd been living. Hey, I called out, leaning across the passenger seat as I rolled down the window. You need a ride? He stopped, sizing me up with eyes that seemed to see straight through me. They were green, sharp like cut glass, and held a flicker of something. Wariness, maybe, or hope. Depends, he said, his voice low, carrying a faint drawl. You gonna make me regret it? I laughed, surprising myself. Only if you hate bad country music. I nodded to the radio, where some twangy ballad was humming through the static. He smirked, and just like that, the air between us shifted like a door creaking open. I'm Lucas, he said, tossing his backpack into the truck bed and climbing in. His presence filled the cab, warm and unfamiliar, like a song I hadn't heard but already knew by heart. Lucas Harper, just passing through. Ethan, I replied, my voice steadier than I felt. Where you headed? He shrugged, staring out the window at the endless stretch of road. Anywhere but here. I didn't press him. Something about the way he said it told me he was running, too. We drove in silence for a while, the hum of the engine and the faint crackle of the radio filling the space between us. The road wound through fields of swaying grass, the kind of place where secrets could hide forever. I stole glances at him, his jawline sharp, his hands calloused, a faint scar above his left eyebrow. He wasn't like anyone I'd ever met in Willow Creek. He was a question I didn't know how to ask. So, I said, breaking the silence, what's your story? Nobody just walks down Route 17 at dusk with nothing but a backpack. He chuckled, but it was hollow. You want a short version or the ugly one? Ugly, I said, surprising myself again. I've had enough of pretty lies. His eyes flicked to mine, searching, and for a moment I thought he might shut me out. But then he leaned back, his head resting against the window, and started talking. Lucas was 22, a runaway from a small town in Tennessee, where his family had disowned him after he came out. They called it a sin, he said, his voice steady but laced with pain. Said I was broken. So I left. Been hitchhiking for months, trying to find something. A place to breathe, maybe. His words hit me like a punch. I never said it out loud. Not to my father, not to myself, but I knew that feeling. The ache of hiding, of pretending to be someone you're not. I wanted to tell him, to spill the truth I'd buried, but the words stuck in my throat. Instead, I asked, you ever think about going back? He shook his head. Some doors don't open again once they're closed. We drove on, the conversation weaving between light and heavy, like a dance neither of us knew the steps to. He told me about the places he'd been. Dive bars in Georgia, a shelter in North Carolina, a beach in Florida where he'd slept under the stars. I told him about Willow Creek, about the garage where I worked, about the way my father's silence could cut deeper than his words. It felt easy talking to him, like I'd known him longer than an hour. By the time we reached a gas station just outside town, the sky was a deep indigo, and my chest felt lighter than it had in years. Lucas hopped out to grab some water, and I watched him through the glass, his easy stride, the way he tilted his head when he smiled at the cashier. I didn't understand the pull I felt, not yet, but it was there tugging at me like a current. When he climbed back in, he handed me a bottle of water, his fingers brushing mine for a split second. My breath caught, and I looked away, afraid he'd see too much. You don't have to keep driving me, he said, his tone softer now. I can make it from here. But I didn't want him to go. Not yet. One more stop, I said, starting the engine. There's a place up the road. Best view in the county. He raised an eyebrow, but didn't argue. We drove to Miller's Hill, a spot where the world seemed to open up, the stars bright enough to make you forget the weight of everything below. I parked the truck, and we climbed out, leaning against the hood, the metal still warm from the engine. The silence between us wasn't heavy anymore. It was alive, electric. You ever feel like you're waiting for something, but you don't know what it is? Lucas asked, his voice barely above a whisper. I nodded, my heart racing. Every damn day. He turned to me, his eyes catching the starlight, and for the first time, I didn't look away. I didn't know what was coming, but I knew I wasn't running anymore. The air on Miller's Hill was cool, carrying the scent of pine and earth, but my skin felt warm where Lucas stood close, his shoulder brushing mine. Under the vast Virginia sky, the stars seemed to pulse with the rhythm of my heartbeat, each one a silent witness to the unspoken thing growing between us. I wanted to say something, anything to bridge the gap, but my words felt too small for the moment. You come here a lot? Lucas asked, his voice cutting through the quiet. He was looking out at the horizon, where the last traces of daylight clung to the hills. Used to, I said, my hands stuffed in my pockets to keep them still. When I was a kid, I'd sneak out here when things got bad at home. Felt like the only place I could think straight. He nodded, like he understood more than I'd said. Funny how the world feels bigger when you're alone. I glanced at him, caught by the way his profile looked against the starlight, strong, yet soft in a way that made my chest ache. You're not alone now, I said, the words slipping out before I could stop them. His eyes met mine, and for a second, the world stopped. There was no Route 17, no Willow Creek, no weight of my father's expectations. Just us, two strangers who weren't strangers anymore. Then he smiled, a real one this time, and it was like the sun breaking through clouds. Guess I'm not, he said. We sat on the hood of the truck, talking until the night grew deep. Lucas told me about the guitar he used to play, how he'd written songs no one would ever hear. I told him about the car I was rebuilding in the garage, a '67 Mustang that was more dream than reality. It was easy, too easy, and that scared me. I'd spent so long building walls, but Lucas was slipping through the cracks like he belonged there. As the hours passed, the conversation turned heavier. You ever think about what you'd do if you could start over? He asked, his voice low, almost lost in the wind. I thought about my father, about the way his face had twisted when I tried to talk to him about who I might be. Yeah, I said, but starting over means leaving everything behind. I don't know if I'm that brave. Lucas looked at me, his expression unreadable. You don't have to be brave, just honest. His words hit harder than I expected, stirring something I'd buried deep. I wanted to tell him about the nights I'd lain awake, wrestling with feelings I didn't understand, about the fear that kept me silent. But before I could, he stood, stretching his arms above his head. Come on, he said, a spark of mischief in his eyes. Show me something real about this place. I grinned, despite myself, and led him down a narrow path to a creek that ran through the hill. The water glinted under the moonlight, and we stood at the edge, skipping stones across the surface. Each splash felt like a small rebellion against the weight of the world. When Lucas laughed, a bright, unguarded sound, I realized I'd never heard anything so alive. You're not bad at this, he said, tossing a stone that skimmed perfectly across the water. Years of practice, I replied, trying to match his throw. My stone sank after 2 skips, and he laughed again, nudging my shoulder. His touch lingered, and I didn't pull away. We stayed by the creek until the air grew chilly, then headed back to the truck. As we climbed in, Lucas hesitated, his hand on the door. Ethan, he said, his voice serious now, why'd you stop for me tonight? I froze, my hand on the key in the ignition. The truth was there, pressing against my ribs, but I wasn't ready to let it out. I don't know, I said finally. Just felt like the right thing to do. He nodded, but his eyes held mine, searching for the words I hadn't said. The drive back to town was quiet, the kind of quiet that feels full like it's holding its breath. I dropped him off at a cheap motel on the edge of Willow Creek, where he said he'd crash for the night. See you around, Ethan, he said, slinging his backpack over his shoulder. Yeah, I replied, my throat tight. See you. I drove home, the road blurring in front of me, my mind replaying every moment of the night. Lucas had stirred something in me, something I couldn't ignore anymore. But Willow Creek wasn't a place for truths like mine. The next morning, I woke to my father's voice booming through the house, demanding I get to the garage. Work was my escape, my routine, but even as I tightened bolts and changed oil, my thoughts kept drifting to Lucas. By noon, I couldn't take it anymore. I told my dad I needed to run an errand and drove to the motel. My heart sank when I saw the parking lot. Empty, except for a cleaning cart outside Lucas's room. He was gone. Panic clawed at me, but then I saw it. A note tucked under my windshield wiper. Meet me at the diner on Main. Ed. The diner was a relic, all chrome and neon, the kind of place where time seemed to stand still. Lucas was there, sitting in a corner booth, his backpack at his feet. He looked up when I walked in, and his smile was enough to steady my racing heart. "Thought you might not show," he said. "Almost didn't," I admitted, sliding into the booth across from him. "But I'm here." We ordered coffee and talked, the conversation picking up where we'd left off. He told me about his plans to head west, maybe to California, where he'd heard people could be themselves. I told him about the fights with my dad, about the pressure to be the son he wanted. The more we talked, the more I felt the walls inside me crumbling. By the time we left the diner, the sun was high, and I didn't want the day to end. "Come with me," I said, impulsive and reckless. "One more drive." Lucas raised an eyebrow, but climbed into the truck. We headed out of town, the road stretching before us like a promise. I didn't know where we were going, but for the first time, I wasn't afraid of what I might find. The truck rumbled along a back road, the kind of path that felt like it led nowhere and everywhere at once. Lucas leaned out the window, the wind tugging at his hair, his laughter cutting through the hum of the engine. I stole glances at him, my heart caught between exhilaration and fear, knowing each mile we drove was pulling me further from the life I'd always known. We ended up at an old orchard, the trees heavy with late summer apples, their branches bowing under the weight. The air smelled sweet, like possibility, and we wandered through the rows, the grass soft under our boots. Lucas plucked an apple and tossed it to me, his grin daring me to take a bite. I did, the juice sharp and tart, and for a moment, I felt like I could outrun my past. "You ever think about staying somewhere?" I asked, leaning against a tree. "Like putting down roots?" He sat cross-legged in the grass, his expression thoughtful. "Tried it once. Didn't stick. People like me, we don't always get to choose where we belong." His words hung heavy, and I wanted to argue, to tell him he could belong here with me. But the thought was absurd. I barely knew him, and yet I felt like I'd known him forever. "What if you found a place that felt right?" I asked, my voice barely steady. He looked at me, his eyes piercing. "You offering, Ethan?" I laughed, trying to deflect, but my face burned. "Just saying Willow Creek's not all bad." He didn't answer, just picked another apple and rolled it between his hands. The silence wasn't uncomfortable, but it was charged, like the air before a storm. We spent the afternoon there, talking about nothing and everything. His favorite books, my secret love for old jazz records, the dreams we'd both tucked away. With every word, I felt myself unraveling, the truth I'd buried clawing its way to the surface. As the sun dipped low, we climbed back into the truck, Cheen. I didn't want to let him go. Not yet. Not when every moment with him felt like a step towards something real. We drove to a quiet clearing by a river, the water shimmering under the fading light. We sat on a fallen log, our knees brushing, and the world felt impossibly small, just the two of us and the rush of the current. "Ethan," Lucas said, his voice soft but steady. "What are you running from?" The question caught me off guard, and I looked away, the river blurring in my vision. "I'm not running." I lied, but my voice cracked, betraying me. He reached out, his hand resting on mine, warm and grounding. "You don't have to tell me," he said. "But whatever it is, it's okay to feel it, to want it." I swallowed hard, my throat tight. I wanted to tell him about the nights I'd spent staring at the ceiling, questioning who I was, about the fear that kept me locked in silence. But instead, I turned my hand over, lacing my fingers with his. His touch was electric, a spark that lit something inside me I couldn't name. We stayed there as the sky darkened, the stars emerging one by one. Lucas talked about his past, about the pain of being cast out, but also the freedom of choosing his own path. "It's not easy," he said, "but it's worth it. Being who you are, it's worth everything." His words settled into me, heavy and true. I wanted to be brave like him, to live without shame, but Willow Creek wasn't Tennessee, and my father's voice still echoed in my head. I squeezed his hand, and he squeezed back, a silent promise that I wasn't alone. The next day, reality crashed back. My father cornered me in the garage, his face hard. "People are talking, Ethan," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "They saw you with that boy. You need to be careful." I wanted to scream, to tell him I didn't care what people thought, but fear choked me. I nodded, muttering something about being friendly, and he let it go, but the weight of his words stayed. That night, I found Lucas at the motel, his backpack packed. "I'm leaving tomorrow," he said, his eyes searching mine. "Come with me." My heart stopped. Leave Willow Creek. Leave my father, my job, the only life I'd known. The idea was terrifying, but the thought of losing Lucas was worse. "I need time," I said, my voice breaking. He nodded, his expression soft but resolute. "I'll wait. One more day." That night, I didn't sleep. I lay awake, torn between the safety of the known and the pull of something more. Lucas was a risk, a leap into the unknown, but he was also the first person who made me feel like I could be myself. By dawn, I knew what I had to do. The morning sun was harsh, cutting through the blinds of my bedroom as I packed a duffel bag with shaking hands. I made my choice, but the weight of it pressed against my chest. Leaving meant confronting my father, facing the town, and admitting the truth I'd hidden for years. I found Lucas at the diner, his eyes lighting up when he saw me. "You're here," he said, his voice a mix of surprise and hope. "I'm coming with you," I said, the words feeling like a vow. His smile was brighter than the sun, and he pulled me into a hug, his arms strong and sure. For the first time, I didn't pull away from the warmth of his touch. We planned to leave at dusk, heading west in my truck, chasing a future neither of us could fully see. But first, I had to face my father. I found him at the garage, his hands stained with grease, his face set into familiar lines of disappointment. "I'm leaving," I told him, my voice steady despite the fear. "And I'm not who you want me to be." His silence was worse than anger. He didn't yell, didn't curse, just looked at me like I was a stranger. "You're throwing everything away," he said finally, his voice cold. "I'm finding myself," I replied, and walked out, my heart pounding but lighter than it had ever been. Lucas and I hit the road as the sky turned gold, the truck rattling with the weight of our dreams. We talked about California, about cities where no one cared who you loved, about a life where we could be free. The road stretched endless before us, and for the first time, I wasn't afraid of where it led. But Willow Creek wasn't done with us. Halfway out of town, a familiar truck pulled up behind us, headlights glaring. It was my cousin Jake and a few of his friends, guys I'd known my whole life, their faces twisted with anger. They'd heard the rumors, seen me with Lucas, and now they were here, blocking the road. "Get out, Ethan," Jake shouted, his voice hard. "We need to talk." Lucas tensed beside me, his hand on the door handle. "You know them?" he asked, his voice low. "Yeah," I said, my stomach twisting. "Stay here." I stepped out, my heart racing as Jake and his friends closed in. "You think you can just leave?" Jake spat. "You think you can shame us like this?" "It's not about you," I said, my voice shaking but firm. "It's about me. About who I am." The words felt like a release, but Jake's face darkened. Before I could react, his fist connected with my jaw, pain exploding through me. I stumbled, but Lucas was there, pulling me back, his eyes blazing. "Leave him alone," he growled, stepping between us. It was a standoff, tense and ugly, until Jake's friends pulled him back, muttering about not wanting trouble. They drove off, leaving us in the dust, my face throbbing, but my resolve unbroken. Lucas helped me into the truck, his touch gentle. "You okay?" he asked, his voice thick with worry. "I will be," I said, and meant it. We drove through the night, the road a ribbon of possibility. Lucas held my hand, his thumb tracing circles on my skin, and I knew I'd made the right choice. The world was big, bigger than Willow Creek, and we were going to find our place in it. The highway stretched west, carrying us past fields and forests, toward a horizon that felt like freedom. Lucas and I took turns driving, the truck's radio playing soft melodies as we shared stories of our pasts and dreams for the future. Every mile was a step away from Willow Creek, from the weight of expectation, and toward a life we could build together. We stopped in small towns along the way, eating greasy diner food and laughing over nothing, the kind of laughter that felt like healing. Lucas taught me how to skip stones better, his hand guiding mine by the edge of a lake in Ohio. I taught him how to change a tire when we got flat in Indiana, his teasing making the work feel light. With every state line we crossed, I felt the pieces of myself falling into place, the truth no longer a splinter, but a part of me I could embrace. In Colorado, we stood on a cliff overlooking a valley, the wind carrying our voices as we shouted our hopes into the air. "I want to live without hiding," I said, my voice steady now. "I want to love you without fear." Lucas turned to me, his eyes bright with tears and joy. "You already are," he said, and kissed me, soft and sure, under a sky so wide it felt like it could hold all our dreams. It was my first kiss, and it was perfect, not because it was flawless, but because it was real. We reached California weeks later, the ocean stretching before us like a promise kept. We found a small apartment in a city where no one knew our names, where we could walk hand in hand without looking over our shoulders. I got a job at a garage, my hands steady on the tools, while Lucas started playing his guitar again, his songs filling our tiny living room with hope. The past didn't vanish. I carried Willow Creek with me. The pain, the lessons, the strength it took to leave. My father never called, but I wrote him a letter, not expecting a reply, but needing to say it. I'm happy. I'm me. Lucas's family didn't reach out either, but he found a new kind of family in the friends we made, in the community that welcomed us without judgment. One night, we stood on a beach, the waves crashing soft and steady. Lucas took my hand, his fingers warm against mine. You changed everything, he said, his voice low, like a secret meant only for me. No, I said, smiling. We did. We weren't perfect. There were fights, doubts, moments when the world felt too heavy. But we faced them together, building a life that was ours. I went for a drive to clear my head, but when I saw him on the road, everything changed forever. And I wouldn't trade that moment for anything.